Daniel Roberts,
And I'm Roger Price.
and you're listening to Artifacts from Highline, where we'll be bringing you stories about some of the artifacts and exhibits we have at the Highland Heritage Museum.
And some of the artifacts we have in the collections room also that are of interest to maybe different people. So that's we're going to try and introduce some new topics to the museum.
So thank you for tuning in. I hope you find some of these interesting stories and enjoy.
Good afternoon. I'm Roger Price, and I'm here with Daniel Roberts in the museum in the radio booth this afternoon. And we're going to talk about one of our exhibits that we have in the gallery. It's on the composer Hovhaness. I think that's how you pronounce this. But yeah, he was a famous composer from the area. Moreover, I think around SeaTac area, but we're going to do a few more modifications to it. But it's a nice exhibit right now. So I'm going to let Daniel say a few things about it and about him in this presentation.
Oh yeah, of course, and plenty of names that I may or may not mess up on the pronunciation. But Hovhaness was born as Alan Hovhannes Chakmakjian, and he was born in an affluent Boston suburb, Somerville, on March 8th, 1911. And his father came from Adana and was a chemistry professor at Tufts College, while his mom was a had Scottish ancestry. But because his mom really didn't want her son learning too much of Armenian culture from his father, she made sure he was known as Alan Scott Vanes, which is seen in some of his earlier works. However, after her death, he did take the surname Hovhannes after his paternal godfather, and he later added an H after the V, thus becoming Hovhannes. So, interesting little bit of how the name came to be. But he had his first piano lessons at around 7 years old, where he had already begun improvising and composing. And according to Alan himself, he would compose secretly at night, with this nighttime creativity being a norm throughout his life. Apparently, according to him, his family really didn't approve of him composing of his own works and would take away what he did. And so what he'd do is he'd hide his works under the bathtub in the bathroom, which I guess it must have been one of those raised bathtubs at the time. He also had a love for mountains, which apparently, if you see in a lot of his works, they were subjects in many of his paintings and drawings, which I guess he also did, and it influenced where he lived, such as Lucerne in Switzerland and here in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. Uh, for his education, he went to college at Tufts College, where he also got a normal academic style of music training. He would get his first compositional training in 1932 at Boston's New England Conservatory of Music, where he was tutored by Frederick Converse. Already in his early 20s, he was starting to draw some interest from the Boston's musical circles. And apparently, he had been influenced by Armenian and Kurdish singers. During the 1930s, his work was mainly chamber music, as he had little chance for orchestral performances. And he pulled further from Armenian culture when he became an organist at St. James Armenian Church in Watertown, Massachusetts, where he was exposed to Armenian liturgy and works of a composer priest. His music also had its own critics. One of them considered his music ghetto music, and he hated it so much that he would talk loudly over one of his recordings to prevent others from listening it, which did a number on his confidence at the time. And But he also, aside from the people that disliked him, he also made friendships, which helped guide his work. He made a friend with Herman Giovanni, who was a Greek painter and mystic, and who had influenced him to seek out his paternal Armenian heritage. It was also sometime after these events that he ended up destroying many of his works, apparently sort of through the encouragement of one of his friends, which included two operas and several symphonies, even one that won a prize in 1933. I guess it was something of kind of letting go of the past or moving on. But in 1944, he formed an amateur orchestra to perform music where he began creating giant melodies in simple and complex modes around stationary or movable tonal centers. I'm sure people that are more into the music would know more of what that was meaning, but it just seemed like it was relevant. Um, it was also that this year that he would have Armenian titles and subject matters using Armenian modes, but not quite Armenian folk melodies, except for three rhapsodies that he made. So it seems like he really, in his earlier life, embraced his Armenian heritage. Uh, he also got help from in getting recognition from some of the other friendships he struck up. One was Dr. Elizabeth Gregory, who he befriended in the 1940s, and was a driving force behind his first concerts in Boston. He also got help from pianist Marho Ajimian by co-founding the Friends of Armenian Music Committee in the 1940s. Mauro and her sister, who was a violinist, Anahid, created a buzz around the composer with two successful concerts in Carnegie Hall and Town Hall. So sounds like their names pulled people in, but then they heard his works, and so it got him some more recognition.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, in the 1950s, he started creating multi-movement symphonies with neo-romantic 2D sections, as well as having influences from Renaissance polyphony and several other influences outside of his Armenian influence. Uh, while living in New York, he also wrote music for radio, television, theater, and dance. He composed music for Voice of America, where he had a role as a director of music, composer, and musical consultant for the Near East and Trans-Caucasian section. In the mid 1950s, his work Symphony 2, Mysterious Mountain, premiered, which brought him national exposure. It was also around this time, I believe, that some of his works got well, not quite digitized, but it was made more available. So, as modern technology became available,
Oh, of
more
course.
more people could be exposed to his work without having to actually go to his concerts. In the 1960s, he had his first trip to Japan, where he worked with the Tokyo Symphony and the Japan Philharmonic, where he had another work recorded, Meditation on Orpheus. Apparently, the Japanese were really struck up with his style of music, so he was quite popular there at the time. He also traveled to other locations, such as a composer in residence at the East-West Center of the University of Hawaii, where he participated in the Festival of Music and Art in Honolulu. It was also in this period in 1963 that he settled in Seattle, where after he was a composer in residence with the Seattle Symphony in 1966 and 67, he finally permanently moved to Seattle in the early 70s. It was during this period that his music moved from Eastern sounding towards a more Western neo-romantic approach, while keeping like a rhapsodic melody and mystical expression. So I guess he decided to expand away from just his roots. From the 1980s until the end of his life, he ended up traveling less. He was a bit older at that time, and he just decided to focus more on composing new works. And he did that pretty earnestly until the 1990s when his illness like, just from age, really forced his work to slow down. But it was during the 80s that he was commissioned to write a symphony uh, on the theme of Mount St. Helens, which, if you're curious, it was Symphony 50. Between 1980 and 1989, he also had 80 works, so he did a lot, at least during that decade. And they also tended to be lengthier than his earlier works. And while his work speed did decline in the 90s, he still did continue to do so until 1996, when, for health reasons, he was no longer able to, until finally in 2000 when he passed away.
Oh, well. Uh,
So, he had there was a lot more to his life too, but I couldn't couldn't fit it all in. But
yeah, well, you covered pretty much his whole entire uh, rise to his, coming, not, I don't know how famous, but yeah, he was quite a composer and different things over the many years.
yeah, I got the impression that he was still rather famous. And if you're ever curious about the man, there's a lot more to read about him. I think towards the end of his life, that was his fifth and lasting marriage.
Uh-huh.
So had met many people, and you know, a lot of them were some interesting individuals themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's great, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think there's much else to talk about unless you have anything to add.
No, I think I'm pretty caught up on now what he was all about. And like I say, we have a exhibit here in the gallery at the museum uh, about his life and stuff. So, and there's going to be some more things added to it as time goes on here too, also.
Of course, yeah. It's hopefully they'll add more because just reading on him, there was so much more to read about the man. Well, folks, I hope you interest found some of this interesting, and I hope you'll join us next time.